Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me in this presentation. It's a very unique presentation coming from a patient expert. My name is Sheila, and I will be entertaining you in the next 30 minutes, bringing to you a specific point of view in my experience as a patient expert and what I see in the future, even though I don't have a crystal ball. So as a patient expert, I believe that many of us have different hats, and we have this ability to change and to bring different perspectives. Sometimes it's an individual perspective because of our experience, and sometimes we are the voice of the patient community. And I feel very privileged to be able to change my hat according to the situation and the opportunities that I have. So I think a little bit about me is necessary. I'm an acromegaly patient. I was diagnosed back in 2003, and I can thank my endocrinologist for putting me on the path of advocacy, because I wouldn't be where I am without him. And I've started my engagement at a grassroots level, then I went on to a national level, and then I went to a global level, which is where I am now. But before I became a patient advocate and before my life turned upside down because of my patient journey, I used to work at an NGO that was administered by UNESCO. And that's where I learned the language of diplomacy. That's where I learned that it was important to have a much wider perspective on the problems that we are looking at. It can't all be micro, it has to be macro, because we are all connected, and what I do today may impact somebody 5 years down the line. Professionally, I am a translator and I am a business English language coach. But I think the biggest milestone is in 2012, when I finally got my master's degree in translation, and I decided that it was time, having regained control of my life, to do something purposeful. And I stumbled upon this new door, and it was my endocrinologist who opened the door for me. I have a motto. I have many, but perhaps this one is the best one, and that is one life, endless opportunities. And I think this is what keeps me in check and always gives me a perspective and never to pull back from anything that comes across my way. But having said this, I would like now to move on to the next part, and that is communication. And this is something that I learned as I worked my way through the advocacy ladder, let's say, that the communication that we have varies very much on what level we are communicating at. Grassroots advocacy groups communicate differently from national, which communicate differently from a global umbrella organization. But that is also true as to how patient advocates communicate. As I mentioned before, you can be both an individual patient advocate, bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience, but you can also bring a baggage that is the community that is behind you. And whether we like it or not, communication has changed drastically in the past 18 months, and it is still changing. What we are noticing now, and I think that resonates with many of you, is that we are now separated by technology. On the one hand, it has brought us together, but it has also separated us. And yes, there is a pandemic which is still raging in many parts of the world, and it is just picking up again in Europe. But we have learned, we have adapted, and that is part of human beings. This is what we are, and we have a great level of adaptability. And so we travel on in our journey. And through this, we unfortunately come across a number of disparities, inequalities, and the differentiated objectives. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of multi-stakeholders, both at European institutions and also with pharma industry. And I think the most eye-opening experience was always the one when I was working with pharma industry. I still remember one of my first conferences and seeing this large room with all these pharma representatives, and I felt so small because I actually thought that nobody would listen to me. But then I realized that I was the one that they should focus on, because I was bringing the experience and the knowledge that they really, really needed in order to improve their products and to build trust. I would like to draw your attention to one word in the image on the right, which is community priorities. And this is something that we as patient organizations have great value in. And that is why the pharma industry often comes to us, because we know exactly how to talk to the patient community. And that is a matter of communication and outreach. But on the other hand, if you look on the left side, there's great disparity. And this is something that patient groups are keenly aware. And our organization, WAPO, the one I represent, which is the World Alliance of Pituitary Organizations, we are keenly acute that there are regions such as Latin America that are in dire need of our support and of information, educational services, and that has been our main focus since we were first created back in 2016. As I mentioned, it's not only the patient groups or the patient organizations that play a key role. They represent a large part of the community. But I would now like to focus on what I prefer to call change makers, and that is individuals at different levels of their patient journey who eventually become advocates. I was not born a patient advocate. I learned the hard way. And so my first diploma was being able to graduate and overcome my disease. And then taking the unconscious decision to give back to the community. I didn't plan it, but it happened. And I realized that I had something to give back to the community. So we patients, we face a lot of doubts and fears, and we never know what is coming around the corner. But yet we face them with our head high. And we always seek for information. We are always seeking information. And now with technology, there is great confusion. And let's not talk about disinformation. So while there is a good group of patient advocates who have overcome many hurdles, we are now facing soon a new generation that will be replacing us or that will be working with us. And that is one of the biggest hurdles. And the last point, which is the heart. and that is the empathy that all human beings have, but patient advocates have more than anybody else, because we have suffered, but we also want to make other people be stronger and make informed choices, and simply bring the patient voice to the table to make sure that nothing is done without us. I'm sure you all know that the patient voice has become stronger, and the shift is also happening in other parts of the world. There is great promise in the US, although there is a different way of working with patient advocates. And that is where I think there is a great learning to be done. Not only among patient advocates, but also among other multi-stakeholders. And this is how the two worlds come together. And this is where patient advocates of all levels, of all countries, of all languages, can manage to bring two worlds completely separated together, because we are able to understand the language of individuals and communities and convey that in the language that multi-stakeholders need to hear and want to hear. And I think this is quite unique. As a translator, I found this common point with my experience, and it just keeps repeating in everything I do. In a recent European Patient Forum Congress that was held in October, I was part of a group of a panel session on the last day. And we were talking about digital health, data saved lives, and how the future looks like in the collection of data and the trust. And one of the panelists said something that just opened my eyes and switched on a light. And he said something along the lines that, yes, knowledge is important, so is access, but if there is no understanding, you can't have knowledge and you can't have access. So with this triangle that I've created, you can take it any way you want it. It depends where you are in your journey, in your patient journey, in your community. I always thought that knowledge was key. But then if you don't have access to knowledge, how can you have understanding? So I can't tell you what is the best way or the best point to start from, but what I gathered from what Aleš Burek said is that these are three of the key points and what I have called the golden triangle in the future of giving information to the community and to the patients. And as I mentioned, there is a great change and a great shift to digital health literacy. We are all wearing, special watches that count our steps, that take our heartbeat, that keep us up to date all the time. We have a mobile phone within our arm's reach, and we are constantly connected. And this is the future. But how can we get to the future if we don't actually train people, teach people, and build trust that where their data is stored, it is safe? And that is one of the major hurdles that I think the general public has. And that, of course, is very evident in Europe because of GDPR and many other aspects. And so I think this is the next step in patient engagement. Call it 3.0, call it any other way. And this is the next hurdle, I think, that we will have to overcome. And how can you build that? How can you create that? And that is through collaboration, because this is, I know you've heard it before. If you don't collaborate, you don't build trust. And if you don't build trust, how can you reach any accomplishments? All right? And because digital health will become pervasive at different rates, I think that digital technology will take as much time as patient engagement has taken to become a, how shall we say, a word that everybody understands. But remember that this is something realistic only in developed countries. The reality is quite different in developing countries or regions. Nonetheless, that data is just as important as what we have here in the developed world. So how do we do this? If you think about it, 20 years ago, China was just coming out of a very tumultuous period. I went to China back in 2003. And believe me, it has drastically changed. There was still the sea of bicycles. You could still see the strong characteristics, political characteristics. And I was, to me, this was something completely new. And yet I was fascinated by it because it was something that I had never come across. And when you leapfrog to today, to this decade, it is amazing what has been accomplished. And I think that some parts of Western Europe and the Western world is a little bit behind. But I'm sure that we will catch up. And it is very important that both sides learn to work together and for the benefit of the patients and the patient communities. The approaches may be different, but the collaboration and the understanding of the cultures is key. This brings me to the next topic, and this is something that is very dear to me, and this is lay summaries. As many of you may know, this is something that has become all the hype in the past 2-3 years. I've been involved in it for the past 2-3 years as well. But while this way may offer an opportunity for medical writers to have an even wider audience, the problem from the general public and the patient perspective is that how do I find them? How do I find this information? I feel privileged because as an patient advocate, I know where to look. I know who to contact if I want to know. I get emails in my inbox and I know when there are new lay summaries. But how do you increase your outreach? And this is so important. It is important not only to the patient communities, but it is even more so in communicating with the patient, whether it is the healthcare professional or even a nurse. Because the majority of the patients they're thirsty for information and they want to take control of the decisions they take, but they can't do that unless they have enough information and to make what is called informed choices. And then I sat and I looked and I wondered, okay, well, how does the future look like? I don't have a crystal ball. But what I have is a feeling that, and hope, that although it will be a great feat to keep everybody balanced and happy, I'm sure that the community will be increasingly involved, and that you will no longer stand out, and that by creating the networks, which are different by nature, by culture, by language, they will in the end come together and create a strong foundation. This is what I hope, and this is what I think will happen. But there are some important pervasive aspects that we must always bear to mind. Always, just like the mechanism of a very exquisite watch. What I think will dominate the future is definitely health literacy. There are some countries that this is just non-existent or it is very low. So there is a lot of work to do with the community. And at the same time, you also will have to work with younger generations who are much more tech savvy than you and I put together. And they will be working on a different rail track. At some point, the community and the more technologically advanced patient community will come to a crossing. And that is where the magic will happen. And that is where the trust that is at the basis of sharing data will work and will make it possible to improve the development of medicines, to have greater participation of subjects in clinical trials, to increase decentralized trials, but most of all, to ensure that education is also given out to the more disparate areas, the more rural areas, to those areas where there is even a problem of infrastructure. So while we patients have a lot of passion and we are involved with the community, we cannot do this alone. We don't want to do this alone because this is a community. Therefore, it requires the work of multi-stakeholders of all levels at all countries, while taking into consideration something that is as fundamental as communication, be it language, be it culture, be it socioeconomic disparities. Whatever it has to be a holistic approach. And we have to consider that, especially now that digital technology will become even more pervasive. I don't know if the telephones will become even smaller. I hope not, because then I won't be able to see, and I will need much stronger glasses. But we can be part. We, and I don't mean just me, and I don't mean the patient community. Everybody can be part of this, provided there is a strong network and there is a proper outreach to the community. Because this is the next problem. This is the next hurdle. This is what we have to go out and fight for. Because we have a good patient community. We have patient groups, organizations. What is lacking is reaching out to the general public and slowly, gradually involving them to build trust and to ensure that they understand that their participation is key and that they will be involved in the future and that they can make a difference. This is so crucial, making somebody understand that I am not using you today to get your data, but I will come back to you and tell you how your data made a difference to what I am developing, to what I am thinking, to what is coming tomorrow. And I think this is the next focus for the next 5 or 6 years. And it has to be a collaborative work with the medical writers, the publishers, the pharma industry, everybody and anybody. And let's not forget, somebody I didn't mention, but it is always there, is the caregivers. Do not forget them, because they are right next to the patient, even if you don't see them. So in closing this, I would just say that if you want to build a better future in medicine development, it has to be founded on 3 aspects: communication, trust, and engagement. And I would just like to thank you for the opportunity. I would like to thank FSG for inviting me. And I do hope that you have taken away something from my presentation. And I do hope that our paths will cross someday, whether it is online, but I would much prefer in front of a hot cup of coffee or tea where we can exchange our experiences. Thank you, and bye-bye.